Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Today class we will start with chapter 11, which is a very important chapter, evaluation and control, which is the last stage in the strategic management. Just to recall the four main stages of strategic management with you. You know that strategic management has four main stages. Stage number one is environmental scanning, of course, internal and external, and we studied two chapters on that. It was chapter 4 and chapter 5. Then the second stage is strategy formulation, and you have to write your strategy, you have to develop your strategy. And you know, strategy formulation, we have discussed three chapters with regard to strategy formulation. It was on three levels: business level strategy, corporate level strategy, and functional level strategy. And in the previous two chapters, which is chapter 10 or chapter 9 and 10, sorry. In chapter 9 and 10, we discussed the strategy implementation. Okay, after strategy formulation you implement your strategy، بتنفذ استراتيجيتك. And the last thing that we have discussed in chapter 10 is how to take care of staffing and directing in implementing your strategy. Now the last stage in strategic management is evaluation and control. Now you have to control, you have to evaluate. Are we really implementing our strategy in the right way? So we have to see, we have to compare the actual implementation of our strategy with the planned one. Okay, so we have to compare actual with planned to see if we are really progressing, if we are really achieving or attaining our strategic objectives or not. That's why the last stage in the strategic management, it's very important in order to measure, to measure your performance and to see if the company is in the right track, attaining and achieving its strategic goals or not. So let's start with this chapter. These are the learning objectives. As I told you before, at the end of each chapter, you have to evaluate yourself as a student if you understand really the chapter or not, based on these learning objectives. Okay, starting from understanding the basic control process up to the developing appropriate control systems and so on. So at the end of each chapter, always try to evaluate your understanding to the chapter based on the learning objectives. Let's start with the evaluation and control process. Now this is a map for your evaluation. It will show you the steps that you have to follow in order to evaluate your strategy. Of course, with regard to the implementation of the strategy, in order to see if you are doing well as a company, if you are really on the right track or not. First step in the evaluation and control process is you have to determine what to measure. Okay, so number one, you will see before you start measuring, say what I am going to measure. For example, some people, they will measure, let's say, market share, for example, or you are going to measure the results of a particular advertising program that you did in order to increase your sales, your revenues, for example. So you have to decide what I am going to measure. I'm going to measure profitability, I'm going to measure sales, I'm going to measure customer satisfaction, whatever. Step number two, you have to establish, this is very important point, standards. You have to establish a predetermined standards. Means that before you start measuring your performance, you should develop the standards that you are going really to depend on in measuring the performance, because measuring means that you have to compare the actual performance with particular standards. And these standards, I call it before, if you still remember, in some chapters I call it the key performance indicators. Okay, هذه بمثابة المتر تبعك اللي تقيس فيه what you have achieved. Okay, now number 3, you have to actually measure your performance. Now, of course, measuring your performance, how? In step number 4, يعني does the performance match with our standards or not, the standards that we have developed in step number 2. يعني in step number 4 we measure performance. Okay, for example, we are measuring let's say the increase in market share. يعني our objective was to increase the market share by 5%, let's say. So our standard is 5%. We measure the performance now. Okay, suppose that the result of the measurement of performance was that we increased our sales by only 3%. So what we do here in number 4, we compare the 3% with the 5%. So as you can see, 3% is less than the 5%. It's less than our standard. Then the answer here will be no, for example, because we are supposed to achieve a 5% increase in sales, but we have achieved only 3%. So the answer will be no. Okay, then we have to take corrective actions. We have to analyze the reasons why we did not achieve the 5%. Okay, and of course we have to decide what are the causes that really did not allow us to achieve our 5% increase in our sales, as an example, of course. Then we have to take our corrective actions. After taking the corrective actions, we have to go back to step number 3 and measure our performance again. Now, if our sales, for example, increase and reaches our standard, which is 5%, then we will stop. Okay, so here, if you compare your measurement of performance with the standards and it was match, يعني 5% match with the 5%, let's say, as your objective, then you will stop. If not, again, as I told you, you have to take the corrective actions in order to correct your track and achieve your goals perfectly as planned. Now, let's see, we are talking in the previous slide, we are talking, if you notice in the process, we are talking about performance. So what is performance? Measuring performance. Measuring what? Performance is an end result of an activity. End. Like again, with our example, yani our purpose, our strategic goal, let's say our one of our objective was to increase sales by 5%. Okay. Now, how we would know that, how we will measure our performance? We will measure our sales, our revenue. If it's really 5%, then our performance is good. If not, then we have something wrong. Okay, as I told you a while ago. So performance is always the end result, okay, of any activity. Now, a company or a firm therefore needs to develop measures that predict likely profitability. Also here you have to take note that measuring performance, the end result, it is an indicator. It will help us to measure our likely profitability. Okay, if our performance is doing well, if we are really achieving our goals according to standards, then we expect higher profitability. Like the increase in market share, it will increase also our profitability. So what I mean to say here, that always measuring performance is related to measuring the future profitability of the company based on its strategic planning. Now these measures, the measures that we are going to develop in order to measure our performance, we call it steering controls. So what is steering controls? Steering controls, as I told you, are measures, okay, or measuring variables that influence future profitability. And what are the measures that will influence the future profitability. For example, we will talk about it after a while, maybe after يعني in this chapter we will talk about the financial measures of performance and the non-financial measures of performance. But just for example, ROI, return on investment, if we measure the return on investment, then we are measuring our profitability. That's why the steering controls are very important. Steering controls measures in order to see the impact of those variables like the ROI, for example, in our profitability. Now, every industry, of course, now those measures will depend on the kind or the type of measures that you are going to use as a steering controls will depend on the type of your industry. Every industry has its own set of key metrics that tend to predict profits. So what is important that steering controls are variables that we have to measure in order to predict our profitability, and of course each industry will have different steering controls in measuring their or in predicting their future profits. Let's see examples on the steering controls with different industries. For example, steering controls examples, for example, the airlines, what are the steering controls in airlines. Airlines, for example, closely monitor cost per available seat mile, ASM. Okay, for example, a certain aircraft, for example, or airplane will take off from Jordan going to the United States. Now we will measure how many available seats, يعني seats which is not taken. هلا السيتس لما الطيارة بتطلع وبكون بعض السيتس available, يعني which means it's not taken, this will add cost to the company, and it should be taken into consideration as a steering control in predicting the profit of the airline company. اوكي طبعا هذا بيأثر، انت طالع وعندك مثلا 250 مقعد والمشغولين فقط 50 مقعد. So we have available seat 200 seat, or let's say, or 100 seat, whatever. Then you have to take it into consideration as your steering control in, of course, predicting your profit as an airline. This is in the airline industry, but for example, as I told you, each industry will have different or will use different kind of steering controls. Okay, for example, also another example of steering control used by retail stores, retail supermarkets, whatever, is the inventory turnover ratio, which means that if of course in which a retailer's cost of goods sold is divided by the average value of its inventories. It means that for example, your sales are 100,000 let's say JD or dollar in a month as a supermarket, for example, or in a week, whatever. Now you have to take into consideration the cost of inventory also, okay, inventory turnover ratio. Then you have, as I told you, to divide, you have to divide your cost of goods sold. It should be divided by the average value of its inventory. Why? Because the inventories has a cost. يعني انت لما بتخزن المادة قبل ما تبيعها، على فترة التخزين هاي والتيرن اوفر تبعها بزيد. اذا كانت طويلة انا بعتها وباجي بحسب الكوست، بدي ادخل كوست التخزين في التكلفة الكلية. لانه انت البضاعة احنا بسموها التجار عنا انه بدور البضاعة، مش هيك بحركها، يعني بدور. انت لما بتبيع اسرع معناته بترد تشتري برأس المال مرة ثانية وبترد تبيع مرة ثانية، فالبروفيت تبعك بيكون أعلى. That's why you have to take into consideration the retail cost of goods sold and you have to divide it by the average value of its inventory in order to see the contribution of inventory turnover ratio in your total cost. Another steering control is, which is very important, customer satisfaction. يعني a lot of companies now, especially service companies, they will measure or one of their steering controls in order to predict their profit, they are using the customer satisfaction as a steering control, which is very important. As much as my customer are satisfied, which means that I will have more profit, of course. Why? Because if my customers are satisfied with my goods and services, then I will expect to sell more. Then, of course, this will be as an indicator for me for a higher profit. What are the types of control? Actually, there are three types of control: output controls, behavior controls, and the input controls. Let's me and you try to differentiate between the three types of controls. Now, output controls, for example, it will specify usually what is to be accomplished by focusing on the end resulting through the use of objectives. That's why we call it output control. يعني we will not look about the behaviors and the actions, we will just look at the end, at the results. For example, our sales quota. What is our sales? Okay? يعني أنا ما بروح للي how did I achieve this goal. لا أنا بروح على objectives, على الend. إذا السيلز كوتا عندي high, if I have a high sales quota, then I, as a steering control or as a type of control, then I am doing well. And we will take into consideration also our profit objectives, for example. In other words, corporations will emphasize output controls. يعني companies, they will use this kind of control, which is the output control, if they are using, what we call the strategy of conglomerate diversification, يعني related diversification. هلا you have to recall from the chapter that we discussed, chapter, I think it was chapter 7, when we discussed the corporate level strategy, and we discussed the growth strategy, because conglomerate diversification is one type of the growth strategies. Now, what's the meaning of conglomerate diversification? I just want to remind you. It means that the company is investing in different type of industries. Yani like before we talk examples about Mitsubishi and so on. Now, conglomerate diversification, that means that the company has more than, the company is investing in many industries and they are offering different types of products. Like I told you, Mitsubishi, for example, they have the car industry, manufacturing industry, and they have also the electronics or electrical devices industry. So in this case, it's better for you to use the output control, which means you will look at the result, for example, at your sales in the car industry by itself alone, and you will look at your sales, what sales did you achieve in the electric devices industry. So you will separate them. So if you have in other words, the strategy of conglomerate diversification, we advise you to use only the output control, because it will help you. تعطيك الريزلت، بتقيس بس الريزلت النهائية. عندي بروفيت كويس، عندي سيلز كويسة، ريفينيو كويس، هذا اللي بقيسه، هذا اللي بعمل له رقابة كنترول. I don't care about the behavior controls, which is the second type of control. Specify how something is done. يعني في الريزلت كنترول، في الاوتبوت كنترول sometimes we call it result control by the way. في الاوتبوت كنترول I care about the results، ما بيهمني كيف، المهم اني حققت. حققت الهدف. انا بيهمني انه what is our كنا احنا we are after, for example, a profit of 1 million. We attain the 1 million, so it's good, we are doing well. But in the behavior controls, no, they concentrate about the focus is on how something is done. أنا بدي كيف جبنا ال 1 million. هلا if you will use, of course, the second type of control, which is the behavior control, through policies. Did we follow the policies, the rules, the regulations, standard operating procedures, and orders from superiors, and so on. Yani we will care about the actions of employees and managers, not only on the results like the first like the first type, which is the output control. Okay, for example, monitoring employees' phone calls. In the first type, we don't care if they make phone calls or not. What I care about is their result. But here, no, I care about their actions. Okay, I care about monitoring employees' PCs, their computers, their personal computers, how they get things done. But in the output control, what I care is about the result. But how is it achieved? I don't care. In the behavior control, as I told you, it's the opposite. I am not looking only for the result. Okay, even though that we have high sales, but I want to also evaluate people and to control, يعني أعمل رقابة based on the behavior of the supervisors or based on the behavior of the employees. وبحاسبهم على البيهيفير تبعهم مش بس على النتيجة. Now in the input controls, of course, our focus is always, or the company focus is always on the resources. Since we have limited resources, and when I say resources, I mean the three types of resources: human resources, okay, financial resources, and material resources. Now, corporation, this is a very important note. This is a very good note. Please take it into consideration. Corporations will focus or emphasize all types of control. يعني some companies may use all types of control اللي هي output والinput والbehavior control if the company is following the strategy of concentric diversification. With the concentric diversification, also again, you have to go back to chapter 7 and to study the growth strategies. Concentric diversifications means related diversification. يعني أنا عندي تنوع في البرودكتس، عندي أكثر من item وأكثر من products, but all of my products are in the same industry, not in different industry like the conglomerate diversification. So if you are following the strategy of conglomerate diversification, as we said, use output controls. But if you are using the concentric diversification, which is the related diversification, then you have to use all types of control: result control, behavior control, and input control. Okay, now let's go to another let's say this is an accounting system which we call activity-based costing, which is also very important in evaluation and control. What's the meaning of ABC? We call it ABC, activity-based costing. طبعا هذول جماعة المحاسبة بيستخدموه, but we will take it from the managerial perspective here. The managerial point of view is a recently developed accounting system or accounting method for allocating indirect and fixed cost, يعني indirect cost and fixed cost, to individual product lines, يعني per product line, not as a whole, based on a value added activities going into that product. This new accounting system, by the way, our pharmaceutical manufacturing companies in Jordan, they are applying the ABC. By the way, it's an accounting system, as I told you. شو معنى ABC? activity based costing. يعني انك تحسب التكلفة حسب النشاط، مش الكلية. تيجي تقول لي والله تكلفتنا الكلية في الشركة كذا، لا، باجي بقول لك انا بدي بير برودكت لاين، كل خط انتاج عندي بدك تحسب له تكلفته لحال. عشان هيك بنسميها انه الاكتيفيتي بيست كوستنج، التكلفة حسب النشاط. بدي كل اكتيفيتي بنسويها بالشركة كم بتكلف لحال. واي ما بدي اياها از هول التوتال كوست تعطيني. اوكي. And this ABC accounting, of course, allows the accountants to charge cost more accurately because it allocates overhead more precisely. I want what is the cost of the marketing activities in the company? What are the cost of the operation activities in the company? What the cost of the human resource activities in the company, including, of course, selection, recruitment, salaries, wages, whatever. What are the cost of the research and development activities? فبنحسب التكلفة لكل activity على حدة. وإذا عندنا أكثر من product line, we will calculate the cost per product line in different type of activities. That's why we call it, it's a very good system. It will give you a precise overhead allocation. وبنعرف انه كل قسم مثلا الماركتينج activities, when we calculate the cost for the marketing activities alone for each activity, we can really discover the non-value added activities. If you notice here we have the value added activities. It has a cost, but also if we apply the ABC system, it will help management to discover that there are some activities which is there, but it's not non-value added and it has a cost. And it will help the management, of course, to determine which are the activities, which are the non-value added activities, and they will try to eliminate, and of course they will eliminate those non-value added activities, which of course will reduce cost, and then it will of course increase profit. Okay, now let's go another tool that we are using in evaluation and control, which is very important tool, enterprise risk management. Here you have to take, here you have just focus with me for a while. The most important thing when you develop your strategy, by the way, to develop also a risk plan or a risk management, a risk analysis or a risk management, because you are planning for the future, and the future is full of uncertainties. That's why we define it corporate-wide integrated process for managing uncertainties, future uncertainties. البلاننج وين بخص اخوان؟ البلاننج هو للماضي ولا للحاضر ولا للمستقبل؟ للمستقبل. طب what if changes happen زي كورونا الان؟ you were not expect, it's an uncertainty. Okay, انت عملت you have developed your strategy before corona, but now of course most of your plans will be affected. Why? Because the uncertainty of corona will affect your strategic plan. That's why we have to really have a contingency planning, يعني alternative plans like plan A and plan B, okay, for the uncertain future, okay, based on scenarios. That's why we said always that you have to develop different plans for, يعني many plans or different plans for different future scenarios. Based on what? Based on this process. يعني these are the steps that you have to follow in rating your risk. Rating your risk, you have to follow 3 steps. Number 1, identify the risk using scenario analysis, as I told you, brainstorming or performing risk assessment. Now, when we say scenario analysis, it means that you should have alternative plans for different future scenarios. For example, إذا أنت كنت شركة نقل عالمية سواء بواخر أو طائرات أو whatever, أنت بدك تحط scenarios for the oil prices, because oil prices are changing. يعني the oil price, it's uncertainty. You have to take it into consideration. Okay, this is my plan, but if the oil price will jump, for example, from $60 or $50 per barrel to $100 per barrel, then this is my alternative planning. This is my scenario. So based on each scenario, with regard to the oil prices, for example, if you are in the transportation industry, then you have to develop different plans for different future scenarios. Second point, you have to rank the risks. Using what? Using some scale of impact and likelihood. Likelihood means probability. يعني احنا بنعمل rank، بنحط الريسك الأول oil prices. What is the impact إذا صار? If this will happen, okay, impact on our strategy. Is it high, medium or low? هذا impact. Then the probability. What is the probability that the price oil will increase next year, for example? Okay, that's why we said both. Imagine, يعني you have to take care. The impact اللي high, impact يعني if this happen, if this oil prices increase, it will affect, okay, our strategy by, okay, what is the effect? Is it minor or major? Is it high, medium or low? Then the probability, okay, the probability of increasing, for example, the probability of oil price increase. Now the third step is measure the risk. Now you have to measure actually the risk using some agreed upon standards, based on standards, and you have here after step number 3 to develop, as I told you, the solutions, future solutions. If this happen, لأنه إحنا لما when we talk about contingency planning, we are talking about what if in the future this or that happen because of the high degree of uncertainty, especially that we are living now in a world which is very dynamic and things changing. That's why strategic planning nowadays is very challenging. لأن الأمور عم تتغير. أنت بتخطط لشيء بتتفاجأ. Sometimes you will be surprised by a high jump, let's say, or a big jump in the increase in interest rate, for example, and you have a lot of loans from banks and so on. Okay, now this ends our lecture for today. Next meeting, our next lecture, inshallah, we will start with what are the traditional financial measures used by companies in order to measure their performance. But we will take the financial measures. طبعا measures, there are different types, as I told you, of measures. Okay, some of it are financial and the other are non-financial. We will discuss this next lecture, inshallah. Until then, I hope you will be always fine, and thank you very much.